What Nilsen had done was to sever the bodies. He'd cut them up into 5 parts. On the way back to the police station, he started to tell us that it was 16. At least he thought he'd murdered 16.
As soon as he opened the door to his apartment, the smell of death came out of the doors.
February 8th, 1983. Michael Catran, a plumbing engineer, responds to complaints made by the tenants of 23 Cranley Gardens regarding a drain blockage on the property. Upon checking the drain, there seemed to be no obvious cause for the blockage. As he was investigating the property further, something caught the engineer's eye. There was something caught in the drain, something he had never seen on the job before. It appeared to be a large lump and several small pieces of bone. The engineer was immediately suspicious and reported his discovery to the police. News of the strange findings soon reached Detective Chief Inspector Peter J.
There's a day in my life that I'll never forget. I had a phone call from the early turn duty officer, a uniform inspector, and he asked me if I would come up to 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill because he'd found something in some drains that he didn't like the look of.
They later had the remains taken to Hornsey Mortuary, where pathologist Professor David Bowen confirmed and advised police that the strange remains were indeed that of a human. Upon learning from the tenants that the human remains came from the top floor flat, and that the current occupant was Dennis Nilsen, an executive officer at a nearby job center, Detective Chief Inspector Peter J. and 2 other colleagues decided to pay Nilsen a little surprise visit. They decided to wait outside 23 Cranley Gardens until Nilsen came home from work. That night, the trio of police met Nilsen upon his arrival from work in the hallway of the Cranley Garden flat. Peter J. told Nilsen that he had come about his drains, and suggested that he tell them where the rest of the remains were. Nilsen invited the detectives inside his flat and told them about the remains of the body, and even showed them where he hid the rest. They arrested Nilsen and took him to the car. On the way to the prison, retired DI Steve McCusker, arresting officer, sat at the back of the car with Nilsen. Something prompted Steve to ask Nilsen how many bodies they are talking about. 1 or 2. Nilsen replied, 15 or 16, I think. This answer startled detectives. Who is this man, and why is he so keen to confess to these murders? Dennis Nilsen was born on the 23rd of November, 1945, in Fraserburgh, Aberdeenshire. Born to Elizabeth Duthie and Olav Magnus Mosheim, Nilsen was the second of 3 children. His father was a Norwegian soldier who had traveled to Scotland in 1940 as part of the Free Norwegian Forces. He considered his grandfather to be his great hero and protector. Nilsen really cherished spending time with his granddad. Nilsen's granddad worked as a fisherman. By the early 1950s, Nilsen's granddad's health was declining. On the 31st of August, 1951, Nilsen's granddad died of a heart attack while fishing in the North Sea. His body was brought back to shore to his family prior to his burial. Nilsen was devastated after news of his grandfather's death hit home. Nilsen would later explain in an interview that in that moment of seeing his granddad's dead body lying on the kitchen table, death and love merged in his mind. In the early years of Nilsen's puberty, he discovered that he was homosexual, which made him feel ashamed and confused. He did not tell anyone that he had feelings for the same sex. He would keep it secret. Nilsen joined the Army service in 1961, just after his 16th birthday. There he worked in the catering corps, which is where he learned his butchering skills that he later used to dissect the bodies of his victims. However, while Nilsen was stationed at Aldershot, his homosexual feelings began to stir, even though he kept his sexual feelings well hidden from his colleagues. After serving his time there, he joined the Metropolitan Police Force, but after only 11 months, he left the force, claiming that the reason for his departure was because of his homosexual, promiscuous lifestyle. Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 people between 1978 and 1983, with many attempts to kill 7 others, which he would later confess to on the day of his trial. After his formal arrest in 1983, he openly confessed to killing 15 people. According to the police reports, Nilsen initially confessed to 3 more dead bodies at his flat. After detectives gathered the dismembered body parts from Nilsen's flat, forensic teams focused their attention on the corpses of the latest victims, seeing if they could piece together who these people were and what history they had with Nilsen. With the bodies reassembled, Professor David Bowen carefully extracted the fingerprints from one of the dismembered hands and matched them to police records. Detectives got the confirmation that they needed. Nilsen's last victim was 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair. Dennis Nilsen was formally charged with murder. Nilsen explained in detail how he went about killing Stephen and disposed of his body. After Nilsen had strangled Sinclair with a homemade weapon, Nilsen left his lifeless body on a couch until the following evening, when he placed Sinclair's body on a plastic sheet in his front room, and then set about dismembering his body. He explained in detail how he dismembered each part of the body, and then boiled them in order to remove the flesh from the bones. He met his first victim in a pub on the 29th of December, 1978. Nilsen explained to detectives that he did not remember his name. He went on about how he used a homemade tie with a string attached to it to strangle him, drowned him in a bucket of water, and then disposed of his body underneath the floorboards. His second victim was a young Canadian tourist by the name of Kenneth Ockenden. He strangled Ockenden to death using an electric cable, and he cleaned the body and slept with it overnight. After that, he disposed of the corpse underneath the floorboards, and on various occasions removed it to have a conversation with it, as if it was still alive. His third victim was Martin Duffy, a homeless 16-year-old boy whom he invited to stay with him for the night. Like the first victim, he too was strangled, drowned, and then disposed of underneath the floorboards. His fourth victim was 26-year-old Billy Sutherland, a male prostitute who too followed Nilsen home and was strangled. His next victim was Malcolm Barlow, a 23-year-old orphan with learning disabilities. In 1982, Nilsen moved into the top floor flat of 23 Cranley Gardens. This is where he murdered the last 3 of his victims, 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair, John Howlett, and 28-year-old Graham Allen. Between 1978 and 1981, Nilsen is known to have killed 12 men, but police could only identify 5 of those 12 men. But what about the motive behind these prolific murders? The trial of Dennis Nilsen was set to begin on the 24th of October, 1983. The names of Kenneth Ockenden, Martin Duffy, Billy Sutherland, Stephen Sinclair, John Howlett, and Graham Allen were all read out. He pled not guilty by reason of mental defect. The jury gave their verdict. Dennis Nilsen was found guilty of the murder of all 6 men and was given a life sentence. He was to serve a minimum of 25 years. After the sentence was read, Nilsen made one last chilling confession to Peter J.
Nilsen said if you hadn't caught me now, it wouldn't have been 15 murders. It would have probably been 150 if I'd been caught later on. He said there was no stopping me. I couldn't help myself. He used to say that when he woke up in the morning, he'd look and find another body there and think, oh no, I've done it again.